we'll be cooking an incredible British classic fish and whips.
There's the rub. There's the rub. That guy is immortal. Very cool. Smack, smack. Boop, boop. Yo guys, what is up? Max on Borderlands 4 video, and today we're going over our Fish and Whips Amon build. Now, Amon got a plethora of buffs for a bunch of his different skill trees. I had tried to make like a whip build before, and it kind of sucked, and a lot of the things with the whip got buffed, so I wanted to try it out, and that's what this build achieves. Basically, we've got a setup where we are incredibly tanky. For mobbing, we just send whips out and hit everything and do pretty solid damage. And then for bossing, there's some cool interactions that we can do to pretty much one-shot or two-shot most bosses. It's a pretty fun build. I don't think it's absolute strongest, but it is a playstyle that I've been wanting to play, and it works out pretty well with some of these buffs. I will also have build guides for like trying to do the drones, and also for like his like onslaught or red tree. This is the first of a few, so stay tuned for those. Hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown. Let's get right into it. So let's do an overview of the build, and then we'll get into the specifics. Also, ignore my firmware right now. It's very much messed up. But we're going to be using the Shatterweight class mod. This reads that Forge Waves now deal melee damage in addition to their other types. Melee attacks while Scourge is active gain increased cryo efficiency and radius. So with this class mod on, our Scourge whips do melee damage, ordnance damage, elemental damage, action skill damage, and skill damage. They're going to be benefiting from a lot of different things, and so it opens up our skill tree to spec into a ton of different things to allow them to scale a bunch of damage. For example, our whips now can proc Tail of the Comet, which gives us cryo dots. Because they're dealing ordnance damage, they also can benefit from blackout and proc shock damage over time. And originally, I had a super cool build where we were using Catastrophe, which was giving us, whenever we apply those shock dots from blackout, we get crit chance, and then I spec'd all the way down to electric fire, which was allowing us to proc fire dots because we were procking blackout, and we were using a Watts for dinner for bonus shock, and we were getting fire dots, cryo dots, and lightning dots, which was really, really cool. And it's a build that I just needs a few more points, and it would be very, very viable. Unfortunately, it just was suffering for boss damage, but it was a really, really cool setup where the whips were doing all of the different types of damage because we were proccing all these different dots, and whenever we're proccing a shock dot, we get a fire dot. However, what just wins out, which is just stronger, is Berserk. I think this is by far, in a way, Amon's strongest skill, and it's going to give us bonus cryo damage with guns and melee damage, which normally wouldn't benefit the whip. However, because the whip is now dealing melee damage, we get Berserk on the whip, which is going to allow us to hit really, really hard with it. And while we're whipping enemies, we get My Touch is Death, which is going to proc our kill skills, which builds up stacks of There Is Only Red to get massive amounts of bonus cryo damage. Now, the reason this is so good, or the way that we're utilizing this, is all of that damage with our whips and all of that damage that we're dealing is building Groundbreaker procs, and we can't actually trigger Groundbreaker with the whips. That is unchanged. However, we can still melee with our shield up and then proc massive Groundbreaker procs, and that's what's like deleting bosses. But for the most part, we are just kind of whipping with There Is Only Red and our Berserk to get big cryo dots with Tail of the Comet, shock dots with blackout, and we're using Eternal Winter, which whenever we whip an enemy, we get action skill duration restored. This was just buffed so that the massive Forge Wage damage from this does way more damage, and we're able to pretty much upkeep our action skill entirely just by using this. We don't need to spec any points into Warrior's Cup. We don't need to spec any points into Eternal. We can just have Eternal Winter up all the time, and this, whenever we're whipping, will also give more uptime of Firewall. Firewall is going to be a buff that we can put down that gives us a 25% increased damage to all of the whips, which not only will hit mobs harder, but will also lead to bigger and faster Groundbreaker procs. And that's kind of an overview. So now let's get into the skill tree specifics. We're going Scorched Kairos. This gives us more Ordnance damage, basically a 30% buff to our whip. We don't really care about the mag size. Then we go Tail of the Comet. This is going to allow us to proc Cryo Dots on enemies, which gives us even more damage. And Ancient Ways gives us even more cryo damage for more dots and more damage. That unlocks Eternal Winter, and we put 1 point into Blackout. Blackout, unfortunately, is still bugged. This build would be even stronger if it wasn't bugged. However, 1 point does the exact same amount of shock damage over time as 5 points, so there's no real point in putting more points into this. It does give us a little bit more crit chance. However, I just don't think it's needed. We can use those points elsewhere. Then we go to Red Tree to get Discombobulate. This gives us melee crit chance. Super nice. And we also go pick up Wield the Storm. This is going to give us more status effect damage and more status effect duration for the dots that we're going to be putting on enemies. We also put points into Gut Punch. Technically, probably get away with 1 point here. I like just for now the like extra damage that we're getting and basically instantly proccing on enemies, as well as Titanium or Tritanium Knuckles gives us more melee damage and more skill damage. This is 60% damage for our whip. And then I put 2 points into the best defense. You could probably get away with just 1 here. This gives us overshield whenever we deal melee damage, which our whips are constantly dealing. This makes us basically unkillable because we're always going to be having our shield up, which is very important. Our shield is a big part of our damage. Note that we're not putting points into Metal Urge. We'll have a 100% cooldown without this. And we're not putting points into Bulletstorm, which gives us gun damage. Gun damage gives Ordnance damage, more damage if it is the Ordnance like gun type. Ours is just dealing Ordnance damage. It's not an Ordnance gun, so we don't need like Bulletstorm. Then we're going hard into the left side for Berserk, and there is only red. This gives us stacking cryo damage that it basically breaks Groundbreaker. The crazy thing with Berserk and Groundbreaker is that normally after you proc a Groundbreaker proc, which by the way is bonus damage that you store, normally this resets. However, the bonus damage from Groundbreaker doesn't reset it, and so you can kind of keep chaining Groundbreaker procs and slams as long as you have enough big Groundbreaker proc to build off of. And that's where we go to My Touch is Death. This basically allows us to have big Berserk bonuses for bossing, which allows us to one-tap bosses. We just need Brimming Vigor to get down there. Then I didn't put any other points in here. You could put a few more points into the fray for some extra damage dealt and damage reduction. I didn't really think it was necessary. And that is our skill tree. Now let's talk gear. For your weapons, doesn't really matter. I would just hold on to something that you can use to kill enemies if you run into annoying modifiers, or if you get into fight for your life. I've got 2 spread launchers on me, and a like cryo shotgun that does a whole bunch of damage. For our like actual important gear, we're rocking a triple bypass. This is going to give us our 3 Repkit charges. 3 Repkit charges are really important because with 3 Repkit charges and now with caffeine, we'll basically instantly get our action skill back whenever it goes down. So that is super, super nice. We're also using the Shatterweight class mod, which I talked about. You want as many points into Berserk as possible. Mine rolled gun damage. That doesn't do anything for me. Ideally, you'd roll like melee, skill, all damage dealt could all be pretty nice. But as many points into Berserk as possible. For our grenade, we're going to be using the Atomic Slippy. I like this thing with Nuke, which gives it more radius, which makes it easier to hit enemies and more damage. The Slippy is being used for this build to stack up Groundbreakers on bosses. You do not need to use it basically anywhere else besides bossing, but this, in conjunction with our whips, will build Groundbreaker procs very, very quickly, and the Slippy hits a ton of times, so you throw 1 at a boss, and you'll basically be fully stacked, and this is only red and Berserk, so that is super, super helpful to like instantly amp up our damage, and then once your damage is amped, go hit with your shield, and you will delete bosses. For our shield, we're using the Watts for dinner. This is bonus shock damage whenever our shield is full, or our overshield is full. Every melee attack we get overshield, so this is up all the time. I tested this versus the heavyweight shield, which gives us like a ton of melee damage, and the bonus damage was simply stronger. My Watts that I have on this has some chance for extra overshield and some gun damage. Ideally, I think you'd want like anything that would give you more overshield, Amp does not work for this particular setup. I don't think energy shields can roll melee bonuses, but would be cool if they could. For your enhancement slot, the like manufacturer bonus doesn't really matter. The only thing that you care about is that you get some gun damage rolls here. We're going to be using things that give us a little bit more melee damage or action skill damage from our specializations based off of the amount of gun damage. So your enhancement doesn't really matter. Just find something with some extra gun damage on it. For our specializations, I was rocking Bare Arms to increase our melee damage. Note that you could go Bare Arms or I Am a Gun for either the action skill damage or the melee damage benefits from guns. I technically went for the Bare Arms simply because our Slippy does melee damage, and now that benefits from gun damage increases, versus our action skill should benefit from both of these. So like it should be negligible which one you pick for the action skill, but it should matter for the like Slippy, which is building a Groundbreaker procs. So that's why I did Bare Arms. Groundbreaker, obviously super key to this build. It gives us those huge boss chunks. And then I personally went with Now with Caffeine so that we can keep our action skill up, and a Honed Mine for the action skill chance and the action skill crit damage. Note that if you wanted to use this build with a crit knife, you could, and then you'd get more damage from a Honed Mine. We are not doing that because I get a lot of crap when I use a throwing knife in a build, but you could go that route as well. I would love to get like the best defense on this build for the extra 30% all damage dealt. Just didn't have the points for it. And also some points into contamination could also be interesting to mess around with for the status effect application chance. But overall, I would just rush these two trees, the Runner and the Daredevil tree. Guys, that is going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. Honestly, I still think Amon needs some love from my initial testing of his things. There's definitely builds that you can make. However, I do think that they were a little light-handed in the buffs today. I'd love to see some even more buffs, not only just to like numerical things, just like how Amon's skill trees are laid out and how some things inherently function. I'd love to see buffs too. For example, like Onslaughter, I think just needs inherently more duration. This thing punches so slowly. By the time this 18-second duration is up, you've punched like 4 enemies, and then you got to wait another like 50-second cooldown by default. I kind of feel the same way about Scourge. Some of his action skills just are over so quickly unless you're specifically having to keep them up with things. And I still think his capstones need some love and some buffs. But overall, he's definitely in a better place than he was. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I will catch y'all in the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.